Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Super excited to have another great guest for you. I am thoroughly, go live, error something. Let's just try this again. One of my things didn't work. Great. Now we're live everywhere, including LinkedIn. Hello, LinkedIn. Glad you could join us. Hey, so friends, I love doing these lives, but you don't have to wait for them. Every episode is recorded and shared through my podcast. You can find out about it at bizbookpublishinghub.com. Lots of other resources there for writers and authors and folks who support writers and authors. So hang out there as well. But in the meantime, let me introduce you to today's guest. I'm pleased to interview one of our Biz Book Publishing Hub's founding partners. Our hub partners are experts who support entrepreneurs along their author journey. Today's guest is a powerhouse in the world of podcast guesting, helping individuals amplify their visibility and grow their businesses through the power of podcast interviews. With over 4 million podcasts available and millions of listeners tuning in regularly, she recognized the incredible potential of being a guest on the right shows to unlock massive opportunities. Her passion lies in making the process simple and effective, helping clients increase podcast downloads, generate new leads, secure speaking engagements, and enhance brand visibility, all while saving precious time. Her expertise has helped CEOs, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and even podcasters themselves expand their networks, grow their businesses, and make significant strides in their industries. She has a focus on serving women and women identifying nonfiction authors. Her agency has become known for providing personalized podcast guest booking services, offering curated pitch lists, and supporting clients in making an impact through meaningful conversations. Please join me in welcoming Julie Fry. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I'm really excited to be here.
So before we dive into a great conversation, here is a quick word from our sponsor. All right, Julie, I had you on my show already once before. Now you're back specifically talking about this service. But I'm always curious, how did you come to do this work? Like, what's the origin story to this like superhero that you have become?
Yeah, so let's go back almost 11 years. Prior to your expert guest, I ran a women's networking organization, and we specialized in helping mom entrepreneurs build successful businesses through networking and education. Most people start businesses because of a passion, not because I'm really stoked to run a business and I know how to do it. So a big part of what I did through that company was connect people. When they would join our membership or come to one of our events, I'd hop on a quick call. I'd find out, what do you do? Who do you do it for? Who do you need to meet? And I was just making connections. I didn't realize at the time that that was my superpower. Yeah, it only took me, 6 or 7 years to figure that out. But in 2014, I was at a conference and I was approached by a podcaster, and we were chatting about what we did. She said, I would love to have you on my podcast. It's new, you'd be guest number 9. And I was a podcast listener. I actually started back in 2008 when it was a really early medium. So I was just excited to be offered a chance to interview on the podcast. So I love telling this story because I did absolutely everything wrong. I did read what her podcast was about, so I did do that part right, but I didn't have a microphone. I didn't share the episode once it went live. I didn't thank her. I don't even think I listened to the episode, so I just did everything that we tell our clients to don't do that. But what did happen that was really positive is the host and I continued to stay in touch over the years. And I ran a conference every year and had invited her to be a keynote speaker. She spoke, she invited me back onto her podcast to help build awareness for the conference. And so through that appearance, it generated a 5-figure sponsor. It generated lots of ticket sales and ultimately new members into our membership. So to this day, she now has pivoted her business. She had a top 0.001% globally popular podcast. Now she's pivoted to working with nonprofits. But we're still friends. We still stay in touch. So through that one podcast interview back in 2014, It added, lots of money to my business. It created this new opportunity for me and created a new friendship. So that was really the impetus for starting this business, is I knew the power of being on the right podcast, talking to the right people with the right message, how it can really connect people to you and want to learn more about you.
I love this story. I love how it demonstrates the outcomes that people can get. I'm curious though, before we dive further into the services you provide, for you to even be the person to gather these mompreneurs together and help them think about businesses and to be networking and teaching them how to connect with each other and to be at conferences, like being approached by podcast hosts to be a guest, even guest number 9. I mean, what were you doing before all of that that primed you to be ready for that? Like, what were the transferable skills that you had acquired in other settings that positioned you? Because I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs, they don't really appreciate
Mhm.
their collective expertise, experience, and network. So
Yeah.
it seems like you already had I guess what I say is you were not born on 2014 to
Yeah.
like do this. You had lived. Tell us a little bit about what happened sort of in the decade or so before all of that that set you up to be ready to make them. I mean, maybe you missed some of the cues the first time around, but like clearly you were already kind of on your way.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I tell people this too, because even if you're doing something completely different from what you did in your corporate life, there's the skills and the talents that you acquired that you can bring to anything. So in my past life, I was in business development and corporate sales. So I was a VP of sales for a consumer products company and worked with Walmart and Target. I've done probably 100 trade shows in my life. Yeah. More than any one person should ever have to do. But I learned the power of being curious. And, when you're standing at a trade show booth and wanting people to come see what you've got, you have to listen, you have to ask questions, you have to be curious. You can't just grab your megaphone and say, hey, come check out this, really great product that we have, because that's going to send people just walking on by and avoiding eye contact with you. So, through that, I developed a big network, because when you're trying to find out who the new buyer is at Walmart and the gatekeeper won't let you through, you talk to your trusted network about, hey, are you guys selling to Walmart? Who's running this category now? So I think that's where I got a lot of those skills, and I had to not be afraid to fall flat on my face if I, tried pitching somebody and it didn't work out. So what? There's somebody else, and it's a no right now. So I think that's probably where I got it. And going back even further, when I was in high school, I was a, hustler. Like I loved working. I loved selling things. I would always create things for school, like, hey, we could make money off selling ads in this program. So I was that kid.
You're after my own heart. I mean, as far as the high school thing, I was very much the kid who got my parents to get a BJ's membership, a BJ's wholesale,
I
that
know
I could buy
BJ's.
candy half price or buy candy and then sell it for twice the price as I
Oh,
guess now
I
I should
love
say it.
it. I
And,
love it.
at first, my parents thought they would never use this BJ's membership,
Mhm.
so that I paid the membership the first year, and then when the renewal came up, I was like, Let's be real. Like, you're
You're
driving me here, but you're also buying a lot of
you're
stuff,
benefiting from
so
this.
we have to share the cost of this." But, I had a bagel. I sold bagels with, like, bagel egg sandwiches
Mhm.
my junior year of high school. Um, it's funny, it was like no one knew about it, but yet my guidance counselor knew, and she actually had me cater,
Oh
a
my god,
guidance counselor meeting,
that is so
and of
cool.
course, it was, like, completely against the rules. And she was like, "I love this entrepreneurial spirit," you know?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I also hear that the networking piece, the learning how to do sales and to not just like completely give up when someone says no, um, finding your way around
Mhm.
gatekeepers. I mean, these are all great skills. And I have to say, just standing on lots of really thin carpet on concrete floors at all of
Mhm.
those trade shows, you gotta have the right shoes, people. That's really important.
Totally, totally.
Or you pay the upsell and they give you like the fancy carpet with the plush. Or
So
you
it sounds
do.
like you've done a trade show or 2.
I've done a trade show or two. I've helped people think through them a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think like all of that's what sort of the experience you bring to these moments. And then I also curious how you ended up listening to podcasts in 2008, because it was hard to find back then.
Mhm.
It was not as easy as just clicking on an app on your phone. You had to
Yeah.
like really know where to go. For a while, it was like just on the computer.
Mhm.
There wasn't easy ways to get it on your phone at all. Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income, he started in 2000. Gosh, I don't know if it was 7, 8, or 9, somewhere
Okay.
around
I'm
there.
thinking 9, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was 9. So if you were listening even before that, like,
Yeah.
that's incredible
So
because
I
it
had
was.
an iPod, and remember iPods?
Oh, yeah.
And you could listen to podcasts on your iPod, and I traveled a lot, and so that was really how I started listening to them, is I was looking for
Oh,
something. I've always been a big reader, and I love to learn, and so
yeah.
I was like, "Oh, this is a cool way to, learn audibly." So the first podcast I listened to was Mark Maron's WTF with Mark Maron. So I've always
Mhm.
been a big comedy genre, still love it. But yeah, that was how I initially started, was just through the iPod. And then our company did get iPhones in 2007. So then it was a lot easier.
Yeah, just to kinda get into that a little bit
Mhm,
more.
mhm.
It's funny 'cause, I've had people even in the last few years say, "How do you listen to a podcast?" And I say, "What kind of phone do you have?" And they say,
Yeah,
"iPhone." I said, "You just
mhm.
look for the app that says podcast."
Yeah.
Like like it's ter I mean, an Android user, I have to actually give them, like, a few options,
Mhm.
but, like, come on, like, it's not
I
on.
know, we still get that too, not as much, but it is. I'm always fascinated by how many people don't listen to podcasts, and even clients of ours who don't really listen to podcasts, but they understand the power of podcasts.
It's a growing audience,
Yeah.
right? Like, is a way in which the percentage of listeners or active listeners or however you look at that, how many hours or how many shows they subscribe to, I think that numbers can only go up. I
Yeah.
am curious how the podcast adjusted some of that, because I know my like I haven't commuted to a job in a very long time, and so it was on my commute that I did a lot of this
Mhm,
listening.
mhm.
I have to like I'm now an avid audiobook listener. And so if I'm doing podcast, I found ways to fit this into my life.
Yeah.
Audiobooks, podcasts, and also even listening into I never thought I would do this, but around the election, I started listening to YouTube channels. So like
Mhm,
kind of paying
mhm.
attention to the video, but mostly
Yeah.
like it's just really another way of getting audio.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they all have a podcast, but I happen to find them on YouTube and I just
Yep.
hadn't looked yet. So how did that adjust though, as people weren't commuting and they were all home, and have habits then shifted again now that people are starting back up again?
Mhm. So, I started this business in early 2024, and when the pandemic happened, the
Wait,
number of podcasts.
what year did you start?
Twen What did I say? 2020.
Yeah,
That probably said 2024.
yeah,
2020 is when
yeah.
I started the business, so almost coming up on 5 years.
Mhm.
So when the pandemic started, there was a huge increase in the number of podcasts because there were a lot of people with extra time on their hands and, "Let's start a podcast." So I if I remember the numbers correctly, I think it went from, like, 500,000 podcasts to, like, 2,000,000 podcasts in a very short period of time. Now, granted, not all of those continue to be active. Having a podcast could be having one episode.
Mhm.
But yes, there was this huge increase in number of podcasts, and then people that tended to listen on their commute to work were no longer commuting to work. So there was definitely a plateau in listenership, and then it even dropped a bit. But people who have found the medium and love the medium have just figured out different ways to work it into their lives. So for me, it's when I walk, or then the short drives driving kids around, sometimes when I'm cleaning. So it's very much the same. And it's interesting that you mentioned YouTube, because so many people, especially like Gen Z, they listen on YouTube. They're just, they're the video generation. Like I never listen. I don't watch videos. I just don't do videos. So I think the listening habits really vary too by age and generation.
About 3 years ago, I've had a show for almost a decade. 9+ years maybe, but almost a year ago, 3 years ago, I started live streaming my interviews.
Mhm.
Partly because I had wondered for like 5 years on and off before that whether I should actually take the video from the Zoom call and do something on YouTube. But
Mhm.
there was all these steps, and the people I saw doing it with like fancy stuff like didn't seem like they were getting many views for the effort.
Yeah.
But live streaming, it just goes there. And,
Yeah.
like, there are definitely people who are commenting and interacting there, but they don't, fine, they don't get the, like, intro, outro music, and
Mhm.
it's fine though,
Yeah.
right? Like, the content's what's most important. But then I also realize it's great visibility for the guest and for the show, and then we
Mhm.
can clean it up and do the RSS feed audio version. So, I think that there's so many different ways now of getting the content recorded. There's sort of the man on the street version where there's like more background noise, but it's like in the moment at a conference.
Mhm.
There's ones that are in studios face to face. So it is interesting how there isn't a cookie cutter path
Yeah.
to creating content anymore. But there are all these shows now. I mean, so at least 500,000, probably well over a million, million and a half shows. A lot of them do have guests. So
Yes.
how do you figure out what shows are the right shows for the people you're working with? I mean,
Mhm.
obviously they have to have guests. They'd still be publishing episodes. I mean, there's probably really, I mean, we're laughing, but I've seen people pitch
Oh,
shows
yeah.
that don't have guests and are no longer running. So
Yes.
you have to have a steady list, a current directory, I guess I would call it. But
Yeah.
what else are you looking for, and what's a match? Like, how do you think about that? Because sometimes I get pitched as a host, and I'm like, you have no idea who I am.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
fact, you and I met because I loved your pitch. That's actually how you and I
Yes.
first
That's
had a
how we
conversation.
met.
I was like, wait, that was a really good pitch. Like, I am gonna have to contact you. So tell me a little bit about how you think about all of these services for your clients.
Yeah, definitely. So, of our clients that are authors, they also have a business. They're using their book to, market their business, get speaking gigs, establish their credibility. So, when we initially have our conversation with a new client and we're going through, okay, who is your target audience? Who are you trying to get heard by? And sometimes we will have people say, everybody, anybody with two legs, two arms, and a head is a potential client. We're like, no, let's narrow that down. So we get as specific as we possibly can, to both the demographics, psychographics, industry, if they're B2B, so that they can go on really targeted podcasts. So outside of the things that you just mentioned, making sure the podcast is established. We say established is 30 episodes,
Mhm.
that they publish on a regular basis. So that would be daily, weekly, biweekly. Sometimes monthly, depending on the industry. That they take guests. So many shows may start off taking guests, and then the hosts realize what a powerful way it is for them to share their own thought leadership, and then they'll switch to solo.
Mhm.
So, actually, opening up your podcast app, looking at the episodes. If you don't see any guests on there, please don't pitch the host. They hate that. And then we take it a step further where my team listens to shows so that they get a sense of the values, what's the style. Do we think that our client and the host will actually have a good conversation? So if you're pitching yourself, you want to do the same thing, because especially if you have a very values driven business, then you want it to be something that you're having fun and engaging. Sure, you could talk to somebody that believes polar opposite things than you do, but this is the first step in hopefully a long-term relationship. And so starting with somebody that you think you would like is a good place to start. We suggest going to the website of whoever it is that is behind the podcast. Sometimes that takes a little bit of research to get through, because they might have a website for their podcast only, but their business is a marketing agency. So, get to what it is that the host does so that you can understand them and see how what you do might complement them, how you could support each other. So, always kind of looking at it through that lens of long-term relationship, because that's hopefully what you're going to benefit from as a result of the conversation. So, yeah.
I have like 6 different things to say to you right now, but first I
Alright.
wanna tell you about a guy that booked me. I made the mistake of not listening to the show.
Mhm.
Busy, right? I'm on a lot of
Yep.
shows, I'll say yes, and I just skipped that step because I'm
Mhm.
like, "Oh, whatever." It was a far-ranging interview, it wasn't focused. In some ways, that was kinda
Mhm.
cool because I got to talk about all the things I do, but
Mhm.
he was very Joe Rogan in his approach.
Mhm.
The graphics that went on the screen, the volume that he spoke at, the rapid pace, the
Mhm.
foul language,
Mhm.
I mean, it was just sorta like I did it, and then my
Yeah.
assistant was like, "I don't even want" because she listens to pull out,
Mhm.
she basically creates show notes because not every show does.
Yep.
So she creates show notes herself in order to share it. She's like, "Oh, I didn't wanna listen to this guy at all. Are
Yeah.
you sure you wanna share this?" And
Yeah.
it was the first time she ever said that to me, and I was like, "Gosh, you're kinda right." Like, this is kind of out of line with what I usually am
Mhm.
on. I mean, it's good content, but it's not really my audience won't love it. Like, I think my people won't love it. And I just glad I was on. I'm sure it was helpful to somebody in his audience, but
Yeah.
I realized that I have to make sure we're aligned in
Mhm.
style, substance, values, all
Yeah.
that because I wanna share it, because what's the
Yeah.
point of me being on a show if I don't share it? Like, I want to be able to give this to the people following me so they can get it and I try to tell something new, right? I try to share something a
Mhm.
little different.
Yep.
So, that was the mistake I made, but I also wanted to say, what you're describing, the amount of effort, it sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
It's all the right steps, but it does sound like a lot of work for someone to do on their own, and I'm sure people can do it on their own. I've coached people through doing it.
Mhm.
But tell me why someone would hire. Like, what is, I don't know, the business development, like, proposition for hiring someone to get you on a podcast versus just slogging through these steps and trying to, like, make it if your goal is only, like, 5 shows a year, is that
Mhm.
enough of a reason to hire? Like,
Yeah.
at what point like, what's the thing that makes someone go from, "Well, I've been on a few shows," to,
Mhm.
like, "I'm committed.
Yeah.
I wanna do, like, a whole tour. Like, I wanna
Mhm.
I wanna get out there." Like, how do you shift people's focus and then realize, like, there are people like you out there?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the criteria I would say is that you're far enough along in your business that you're not doing everything yourself anymore. Like your revenue is such that you're growing, it's consistent. You already spend a little money on marketing, and you've perhaps experimented. And so if you've been on a few podcasts and you've seen some ROI from it, then that's usually a huge like boom, boom, boom. Like this makes sense to hire out because it's worked and you can now put it on autopilot, have everybody do the heavy lift, and then you just show up and do the interview and benefit from it. So that I would say is half of our client base has been on podcasts before, they've seen the ROI, they don't want to be doing this themselves, they don't have somebody on their team that can do it. The other trigger event I would say is you have something that is a goal, like you have a book. You either are thinking about writing the book, so you need to build up your audience so that if you go to a publisher that they are like, okay, who are you and what's your audience? If you don't have one, it's going to be very hard to get a publishing deal. If you've already written the book and you're looking for a way to market it, doing an online book tour via podcast is a really great cost-effective way to do it. So that's a big one. Folks that have decided to get really serious about sharing their thought leadership, often in a like an executive role, maybe they work for a company and they have a unique point of view on their industry. Getting on podcasts, and if you're working for a company, oftentimes they'll foot the bill for you because it's a marketing activity. Those are great ways for people to just hire it out outside of the that this already works for you. So those are just a couple reasons why you'd want to hire it out.
When you're new to entrepreneurship, it feels like creating content is your job.
Hmm.
So the idea of hiring someone to help you create content or promote your content seems like, "What? No, that's my job."
Yeah.
And then you finally start getting clients, and then you have clients you have to serve, and then you realize you have to keep getting more clients. And so the there was this moment where you're like, "Oh, I shouldn't be the one,
Doing all the
maybe I can
things.
write the thing and someone else can hit post, 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 and all the
Yeah.
social things." Like, or I can draft something and someone could make it look good, or
Yeah.
make it into a Canva thing. Similar to that is like at first you're the one making these first connections, and a friend of yours invites you to be on a podcast. One of the things I tell a lot of folks who want to do podcasts is they've got to be on one first. Like, uh, you find someone friendly who's
Yeah.
willing to get you on the show, because as a host, like, I just need to hear you. Like, if you're not a known quantity in some way, if I gave one person and it worked out beautifully. I met her in person. She loved how she approached networking. She had no website, no book, no content.
Mhm.
I just thought she was smart. She was young. She was early 30s. I wanted to highlight to her approach. I invited her on. It was hard to find a bio for her. Like,
Oh,
there was
mhm.
nothing online about her. When we
Yeah.
were trying to write her intro,
Mhm.
there was nothing. And so I'm glad I gave her the break, and it was one of the best shows. My assistant still talks about it. They hit it
Oh,
off and connected. But I want to be able to give those opportunities, but only because we met in person did it work. Like,
yeah.
if she had just pitched me out of nowhere, it's like a lot harder to say yes to an unknown.
Yeah.
So having, even if you don't have a website, if you've been on one show,
Mhm.
you can always share that and let
Include
people
that
know,
in
like,
your pitch.
hey, this is another thing I've done. I mean, just makes like us, like, you said it yourself, joining without a good mic, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
probably one of the number one things that if you really want to be in a show, it's worth investing, and it's not even a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have lots of suggestions for folks for
Mhm.
tech, but I'm thinking, like, people probably think it has to be like a whole studio. No, like,
No.
it's just a simple like USB plug and play mic, that'll make you sound just a lot better than I think that airy sound of an empty room, it's, like,
Yeah.
awful. I made a mistake. Oh, it was awful. You would have noticed this. The last recording I did on StreamYard for my podcast,
Mhm.
I had it set to the wrong mic because I had just come back
Oh,
from
no.
yeah, I just came back from my time away. I was on a vacation, then at a conference in Costa Rica, speaking about book launch strategies, which was fun. But I just hadn't double checked. It had been right before I left, and I don't know why it changed. I listened to it after the fact, and I was like, "Oh, it's like awful, awful,
Sorry,
awful."
listeners.
Yeah, I know. I really do feel like I'm gonna put a little disclaimer, like, apologies for the audio on this episode. The content's really good. So, yeah, I mean, someone once said to me, the host needs to sound good, even if the guest is a little iffy, because it could sort of be like forgiven in the sense of like AM radio, the call-in person's not as good as the radio host. That might have been true. I feel like, 10 years ago. I feel like that's less true now.
Here's the only people that can get away with it is A-lister celebrities. I listen to Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, and he interviews other celebrities, and every once in a while he will have somebody on that sounds terrible, and I'm one surprised that the production teams aren't like sending them the proper equipment or giving them tips. But I forgive it because he's interviewing Michelle Obama or something like that. So
Okay, so until you reach A-lister status or A+ lister status like Michelle Obama, get the right equipment.
get the
And
right, yeah.
yeah,
Spend the $50.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I had to buy this really fancy mic, and Smart Passive Income with Pat Flynn was a huge influence when I got started. I've been basically doing the show since 2015, so I'm about to hit a decade. And but it was really him demonstrating the sound quality of different mics. And at the
Yes.
time, I lived on a college campus in staff housing across the street from a hospital in a block of hospitals with
Mm,
buses and cabs and Red
sirens.
Sox fans. We were half a mile from Fenway Park. So I needed a quality mic that would block all of that out. And so it was a big investment, but honestly, I'm still using it a decade later.
That's
So I feel like I
great.
got my money's worth.
That's great.
So what I would love to hear when you're thinking about setting up authors in particular for success, is there something that you think authors should focus on as far as metrics for success, either things you've learned about the writing process or the marketing? Like, how do they know that their effort to market their book and get their book out there is working? Like, what are they tracking, and what should they be tracking
Yeah.
based on your experience?
Yeah, and so It's different for everybody. It always starts with why. Like, why do you want to do this? And for some people, the why of marketing the book via podcasts is not really to sell more books, it's to get more clients. And so it just depends. Some people, it is to grow their following. And so encouraging people to connect with you on LinkedIn or whatever the platform is, like that's the metric to measure after your podcast interviews. If you have a podcast, and you also have a book, but you really want to grow your podcast because it feeds your, client pipeline, then track your downloads from every podcast appearance. So just think about what it is that you really want guesting to do for you, and then track that metric. So that's really, it's pretty simple, but people get bogged down in it. At the end of the day, most people are not, especially in the nonfiction space, going on podcasts to sell more books. They're doing it to grow their network. They're using it to elevate their thought leadership, and they're using it as a client attraction strategy.
I mean, even writing a book isn't to sell books. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're really honest about how this all works, individual book sales is not the focus, except maybe I do during the launch because I want to get
Mhm.
reviews that are verified reviews through Amazon. But it's about book sales. And how do you get
Yes.
those? Through speaking and
Yeah.
coaching and consulting. Well, how do you get that? Well, someone who sees you're an author, believes that you have the right experience,
Mhm.
and then they invite you to do the next thing.
Yep.
So the book is like the credibility factor. The podcast is the way to amplify that and
Yeah.
then get the next opportunity to present your ideas. The
Yeah.
book
It's
could
the
then be a sell-on.
staircase that will, take you on to the next
Yeah.
thing. Like you mentioned, the speaking opportunity, the introduction to that bigger podcast host. So it is, we often call it just the staircase to visibility.
Mhm. I love it. Dory Clark, who's been a longtime friend and mentor and sometimes coach of mine, was on my show back in 2016, and she shared a bonus, opt-in link with me for a piece of content that I love,
Mm.
and it was branded to me. There was this page for like Robbie's listeners,
Mhm.
and do you know I am still sharing it all the time.
That's
I
cool.
share it in networking events. I share it
Mhm.
when I'm talking to clients and prospects.
Mhm.
Whenever I'm talking her up, I mention it, and
Mhm.
it's easy for me to remember
Yeah.
the link. I have had such a tiny percentage of guests come prepared. Now,
Uh,
hers was sort of the next step, which is
yeah.
personalized to my audience. And
Yeah.
I've done that too now twice for the first 2 books,
Mhm.
and it's a ton of effort. I mean, it's just really replicate the page, change the
Yeah.
host name. It's not huge, but you need to
Sure.
have a little bit of a process. But even just showing up with a clear call to action
Mhm.
that's not go to my website,
Yep.
go to my
Yep.
LinkedIn. Here's
Yeah.
my email address. I've had people give out their phone number. I'm like, okay.
Okay.
Like, I'm sure, I guess. But I'm surprised in all the times I don't even know what number. I'm at 400 plus. You're number 415 for me,
Dang.
right? I'm doing this a long time.
Yeah.
Why don't guests show up with a clear call to action branded to them, an
Mhm.
opt-in? Have you found, I mean, your job is to probably help them figure out what that
Yeah.
even is. And that
Yes.
I would say is one of the reasons to work with someone like you, is to not waste this opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I think that most people, gosh, how do I even answer this? Most people who hear about podcast guesting, they don't really realize like all the pieces that you need to be good at to have it really generate ROI. So I'd say that's 80% of the people that show up on podcasts. And then you have the folks that do the branded links. There's a tool called Pretty Links if you have a WordPress site that you can quickly and easily generate customized branded links for each show. We have some clients that we do that for. And it works great. And then you can go back and see, like, oh, when I was on Robbie's show, it generated 100 downloads for my freebie. Um, but sometimes directing people to your website, because if you really want people to just book a call with you and it's right there on the homepage of your website, that is okay. So it all comes back to, what is the next step that you want the listener to take after they hear you? Is it download your thing? Is it to book a call with you? Is it to follow you on LinkedIn? So it really just depends. But I would say that most of it is just not knowing that that's what you're supposed to do.
That is actually like a key step. And as a host, I haven't done this yet. I've talked about it and I keep forgetting, but I thought about changing my intake form because
Uh-huh.
you've been through my process. Like I hate this as a guest, like having to go back and forth.
Mhm.
So I've made my own, like, here's everything you need to know to interview
Yep.
me page. But when I'm a host, I want them to just put all that information in
Yep.
this little form for me. I collect your image, I collect all your sites, we use that information to like create the intro. We know, but I don't have a section that says like, what is your offer for
Oh,
my listeners? Like
yeah.
that prompt would probably help them do it.
Yeah. It,
It's
it
not
would.
required, but it would definitely like spur them to action.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is interesting how I think the full value of being a guest in a show is way more than just being a guest in the show, and most
Yes.
people aren't really realizing that.
Yeah, yeah. For us, it's the relationship. And
Mhm.
that's, when I guest on shows, I made a concerted effort this year to walk my talk and pitch myself to 2 shows a month. And I'm happy to report that I have a 100% success rate. But all of these people that I have guested on their shows, like, there's one we're doing a collaboration with, there's another one that referred me to a new client. It's just when you make the effort to show up for the relationship and don't treat it as a transaction, like it is magical what can happen. I know you're a big proponent of networking the right way. So that podcast guesting to me, it's effortless visibility.
Mhm.
It is something you do once and it can continue to show up for you in so many ways. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna ask you to share a client story, but it sounds like you're a little bit like, "I'm not just the owner, I'm the client." I feel like your own success at, being selective at where you're pitching. I mean, even me, I'll give you the testimonial, like, you pitched me on behalf of a friend of yours, and it was I mean, I wrote you to wanna know who
Mhm.
you were, and I booked the guest.
Yes, yes,
So, here we are years later still collaborating.
yeah.
So you're walking the walk, and I think this is the real thing, is people seeing what's possible. I wanted to shift gears again in a minute here because we're going to wrap up. But you and I most recently are staying connected through the Biz Book Publishing
Mhm.
Hub. This podcast is sort of an offshoot of that, where I get to have the visibility for folks like you who are hub partners, but also for the authors that I work with in my Kindle cross promotion campaigns. But you were one of the people who said yes. I mean, I was
Mhm.
testing the idea a year ago and seeing whether it had legs and would anyone care and is this what people need. And you were one of the people I was like, "Hey, what do you think?" And you were like, "I'm in."
Yeah,
So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience, like attending the events, getting to know other hub partners, any collaborations,
yeah.
getting clients. Like overall, what's it been like to be a part of this?
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember, when did you start it? In the summer? Was it summertime or?
Yeah, I mean, it went live in like April, May,
Okay.
like soft launch April, full launch May. So like right at the beginning of summer, and
Gotcha.
all the research calls like right before that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I love the way you run your events. I mean, clearly your experience with Zoom, you're such
Mm.
a pro at creating engaging events that people want to not only attend, but stay and refer other people to. So the combination of small breakout rooms where you get to know a few people on a deeper level, from the guest speakers that you bring on for the hub partner only events, to the information that is, for the more general, for the authors and authors to be, providing value to them. It's just incredibly well run and worth every minute that you spend there. So that, from a, like, I'm really selective about what events I go to because my time is really valuable. I'm always happy to spend the time at those events. As far as the people that I've met, they have been phenomenal. So I had the benefit of being invited to speak at one of your events, and I had multiple people reach out to me afterwards. One was just to get to know you. One was an invite to be on somebody's podcast. And then what was the other? Oh, and then the other one was a woman who ended up hiring us to do a customized pitch list for her. So, and out of those three, like the one woman who we just had a get to know you call, she is a media strategist and she teaches people how to be more media savvy. So we're collaborating on a project next year. The woman who invited me on her podcast, I placed another one of our clients, actually the same client that I initially booked on your podcast, um, pitched that client for her podcast. They ended up working together. So, mutually beneficial client relationship. And Susan is her name, and we've just continued to stay in touch. She's fabulous. So, yeah, and this is only just after attending a few sessions. It's really great. The people are super high quality, super smart, like wonderful resources to learn from.
Wow. I'm loving hearing this because I'm so invested in creating a really supportive author community, but
Mhm.
also a really engaged community for all the service providers
Yeah.
who support these authors because a lot of us are just in our own lane doing our own thing, and we benefit when we have people who work before, during, and after our own clients, and we have the referrals that we can send to each other. So, and I love hosting events. So thank you for
Yeah.
acknowledging how those are run. Really fun. So in a moment, we're going to be wrapping up here with my favorite wrap-up question, which I'll tell you now, but then we're going to go to a quick commercial break. I want you to think about what advice would you give someone who's writing a book to help them grow a business. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. All right, Julie.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone who's writing a book to help them grow a business?
Talk to people. So tell people, tell everybody what you're doing, because you're going to have ideas and information come up by your collective hive mind that you would have never thought of on your own. So don't do it in a silo. Get
Mhm.
help. And whether that's a free writing community that you could probably find through attending one of Robbie's events, or a paid hiring a book coach. But there's lots of different ways depending on your budget of how you can get help. But just start talking to people and telling people what you're doing.
Yeah, I keep saying, like, don't write alone. Don't write
Hmm.
in private. Don't
Yeah,
write in secret.
yeah.
Like, it's unfortunate because a lot of people do it, but you build buzz. You also get better ideas for the book. You get early readers for the book. Yeah,
Hmm.
I get quotes to the book, stories to the book. I
Yeah.
love that. So thank you for sharing that. And now I'd love for you to share, how can people find you and follow your work?
So, if you are listening and you've been thinking about being a podcast guest, we do have a free resource that is a checklist that will help you be the best guest ever that hosts want to invite back again. And so that's at yourexpertguest.com/checklist. But other than that, you can contact me through the website. I'd love to chat. I love meeting people. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Robbie.
You're very welcome. And at the show notes, we're going to put your LinkedIn and your Instagram and your
Great.
website, the checklist, but also a link to your Hub partner profile where you'll learn all about what she does, all of her contact info, all the things that she can support you in doing, a free download of something she's offering. It's, we really are giving people a lot of information at bizbookpublishinghub.com. So check out all the resources there, including an invitation to come to our free month, every other month, virtual networking events for writers and authors, and all the show notes and just more information about how you can, write your book successfully. Julie, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's been really great.
It has been. Thanks again, Robbie.